Well, I want to thank Larry for inviting me here. Equally, he's been a great friend to me, and we've shared a lot of fun times. He was with us last week in Cleveland for a shoot. He just, out of his own kindness, came up and helped us do a production. And I love coming to this NMC meeting convention because there's so many people that you get to learn from. It's truly a wonderful learning experience, and I thank Don for introducing me to Larry, and Larry for introducing me to all the rest of you. It's been great. For me, creativity is pretty serious business. I mean, that's what I do. I have to do things every single day that are creative, and I have to. The problem with my creative things is that, you know, if you do something and you show it to 10 people, that's one problem. A lot of times I have to show mine to 10 million in really short order, and it's fun and it's rewarding, but it's nerve-wracking, not unlike this clock here, which is counting down. You know, I grew up in a really small town in western Nebraska, and there weren't a lot of people to talk to. So now whenever I see somebody, I want to talk to them as much as I possibly can. So, you know, you'll have to just forgive me if I do that. For me, creativity is it's a constant enterprise. It's about hard work. It's about constant work. I don't have a lot of rules. One of them basically is that there's no off position in my visual switch. I just can't turn it off. Every time I see something, I'll look around. I'll see some light, you know. I'll see the people out here in the audience, and I'll see how one of them will have their computer screen tilted this way, and the light's coming on their face in different fashions, or Sam's hiding behind hers over here. And I'll take a mental note of that, and then I'll use it in a picture or, you know, a video in short order. And most of the things that I learned were taught to me by a couple of, I say old women, who are now the age that I am, when they were teaching me. But the one that had the biggest influence on me was my mother. And that's my mom with my daughter, Havana. And they're probably the two biggest soul influences in my life and my career, visually especially. My mom was like you, she's a professional educator. She taught or was an administrator for 60 years, which is a pretty long time to have a job, I think, in one enterprise or another. She got a second or third master's degree when she was 70 just because she could and she felt like it. But she was really a practical person, and that's how I try to apply most of the lessons I know about creativity. And one of the things that I remembered about my mom, first of all, was that she was up at 5 a.m. every morning working because she wanted to. She was studying, reading, building something. She was a visual artist. She was a creative person. She was always taking notes, always engaged. But there are a couple stories that were seminal to my learning experience that my mom, you know, was instrumental in. And one of the ones that was the biggest takeaway for me was when I was 8. We changed houses. And as I said, we lived in a small town in western Nebraska. And believe it or not, there weren't grocery stores open on Sundays. And so we moved on Saturday night into Sunday morning. And so she didn't have any eggs or milk or butter. And that's normally not that big of a deal. You can get by a day without that, except it was my birthday. And for all you cooks out there, you realize that means no birthday cake, which put her in line for worst mom ever. Okay. So she knew that then, as is now, my favorite food probably is caramel popcorn. So she had the ingredients to make caramel popcorn. So she made a massive amount of caramel popcorn, took a cookie sheet, and spelled my name, you know, Bill, in cursive letters. And that was the cake. And so I didn't realize she didn't have the other ingredients. All I knew is that I had the coolest cake ever. It was huge. It's a giant popcorn ball. I mean, you can imagine a 3-foot popcorn ball. So for the rest of, you know, until I was in law school, every time she said, what kind of a cake do you want? I said, I want that caramel popcorn cake. She confessed at that point that it had been an act of desperation and that she didn't have the ingredients. So she went from being on the precipice of being the worst mom ever to being greatest, smartest mom ever, just because she took what she had to work with and made it. She just owned the moment. And I try to do that with everything I do visually. I get put in situations constantly where it seems hopeless, and I don't know what I'm going to do, how I'm going to make something happen. And I just think about, okay, what would mom do? And that solves the problem. So there was another woman that did something really, really special and important for me. And her name was Helen Swanson. I don't have a picture of Helen with me, or maybe ever, unfortunately. At the time that she gave me this gift, she was my third grade teacher. And I could read when I was 3. And it was amazing. I'd get something and I'd read it. Well, all of a sudden, when I was 7 and I was in 3rd grade, Helen realized I couldn't read at all. That I had been given a gift, which is I have basically total visual recall. I can look at something and replicate it instantly. So I wasn't reading. I didn't understand. I didn't have any comprehension. I could just look at something and write it down. So when she noticed one day that she changed the words, the order of the words, and I couldn't do it. I had no idea what was going on. My mom had missed it. My dad, who was an English scholar, had missed it. Everybody had missed it. So I could just take and build anything, but had no idea what was going on with it. So Helen, 63-year-old woman, master's degree from Colorado State University. Her twin sister was also a teacher. Her younger sister was also a teacher. She took and built a card table. She took a card table, and then she took and made a tent out of a bed sheet. She took it home, sewed it, put a little toilet plunger in the middle of it, and made a tent. And then she took me to the library, and she said, let's pick out a book you'd like. And the book that I wanted to be interested in was Daniel Boone. So she took it back, and she took some scraps of carpet and made me a coonskin cap. So then every day we would go, and when all the other kids were doing their exercises, she'd get in this tent with me. I'd get the coonskin cap, and she taught me how to read Daniel Boone. Well, I didn't realize until a lot later, not only had she taught me how to read, but she'd also done it in a very clever fashion. She'd engaged me with something that I wanted to learn from. She built the tent so that she and I could go in there, and my focus would be limited to her, and the other kids wouldn't see that I couldn't read, and I wouldn't be ridiculed. It's a pretty clever solution to a difficult problem, and it changed my life radically. So, it was interesting. When I got one of my degrees, she and her sister drove the 1,500 miles to where I was getting the degree and waited for me when I got off stage, and what she had for me was a copy of the Daniel Boone book. So a lot of what I have to do is be creative on demand, and being able to be creative in the moment in the world that I live in, which is working in the media, is what separates the players from the posers. I'll get 2 seconds, and I have to do it. I have to do it right now, and I have to do it well. This is a picture. I'm going to show you probably, 10 pictures today, maybe not even that many. They're not necessarily my best, not even my favorites, but they all have something about them that matters. This was before digital, before autofocus, and believe it or not, the cameras didn't even have light meters in them. Yeah, so this I had 20 minutes to drive from the paper to go to this church in Little Haiti. It was on Good Friday, and I had to make a picture and get it back for the first edition. There was no light. There was no moment. This is a 1-second exposure. That's why the thumb is moving. I just held my breath, took it, the light fell in. It's a portrait that I like, but I just had to find something. I had to reduce that moment to its essence and make it easily communicatable on newsprint in a big hurry to our million readers. This is a picture that represents remembering for me. I was at the World Swimming Championships in Perth, Australia, and I was out going for a walk in the early morning, and I realized that the pool was extremely still at that point. And I noticed that the lane markers were reflecting the different color, the red, in the water. So, and I knew that I had to isolate that in a very definite manner in order to make it work as a communication. So I went back the next morning at 4 o'clock, took a 600-millimeter lens, and waited for the first swimmer to get in the water, because I had to take it when the first guy went in the first time, otherwise it would have been ripples and it wouldn't have worked. But I saw it, wrote it down, saved it, remembered it, came back to it. This is George Steinbrenner, the owner of the Yankees. When he was in 1990, he was suspended for baseball. 1993, he came back, and we wanted to put him on the cover of Sports Illustrated's baseball issue. Well, he'd agreed to pose, and there's a fabulous picture that won a Pulitzer Prize in 1946 by Nat Fine of Babe Ruth back, leaning on, you can see his back. So we were going to put, with Yankee Stadium behind it, we're going to put Mr. Steinbrenner in that place, in that pose, and then the caption writers or the cover headline people could say Steinbrenner's back. Well, a day before we were supposed to shoot this, which is an enormously important assignment for me, especially then, his public relations person called and said, sorry, Mr. Steinbrenner is afraid that if he goes in the stadium 2 days before the season starts to do this picture for you, the commissioner will say that violates the terms of his parole because he didn't get along with the commissioner very well, or a lot of people, apparently. But he said, so he can't do it, we're really sorry. So I was in a panic because I still had to solve the problem. So I got a biography, read about Steinbrenner, realized that he loved Napoleon, sent him a bottle of wine with a note saying, hey, Napoleon got screwed, so did you. He didn't come back, but I think you will. Let's do a picture. Will you dress as Napoleon? Later that afternoon, he had it couriered over to his office. Later that afternoon, I get a call on my cell phone, that very unmistakable voice. He said, wow, you're a very clever young man. Let's do this. He said, if you bring the Napoleon outfit, I'll bring the horse and we'll do the picture. I said, great. How much time do we have? So he said, we can do it tomorrow in Ocala. I said, fine. I went down, took 3 frames. And his conditions were that I had to bring a full-length mirror. He sat on the horse, looked at the mirror. I took 3 frames. He said, do you like it? I said, yeah, I think it looks great. He says, okay. Gets off the horse. I'm like, whoa, wait. You know, this was on film. I was a little bit nervous. I said, I thought we had all morning. He said, well, you said that you liked it. I like it. And our editor at the time was a guy named Mark Mulvoy, who I love, by the way. But Steinbrenner says, well, if we do any more than 3 choices, you'll send it to New York, and that idiot Mulvoy will just screw it up for both of us. So I learned something from George Steinbrenner about being selective. This is a picture I had in my mind. I had to overpower the sun in Central Australia. So I just took 3 people, went out there, set up a light, and made a picture that I think is interesting. And I had it in my head. This is about pre-visualization. I'm going fast because there's a couple of videos I really want to show you. It's hard for me to go fast when talking. You were right, Larry. This is another one. If you go on my website, billfrakes.com, there's an explanation of how I did this. This is a camera that I built. When I say I built it, I mean I had an idea for a camera, and I got some really smart people from MIT and other places to help me do the software and the hardware, and we made this happen. And it won the gold medal in World Press Photo in 2000. This is my daughter, Havana, when she's 5 minutes old. It's as with most things now, when I try to think about how I want to explain something, I used to think about how I wanted to explain it to the people in Scottsbluff, the town I grew up in western Nebraska. Now I think about when I want to figure out how to make something happen, I figure out how do I want to explain it to Havana. And if Havana can understand it and gets it, and she's bright, she's only 12 now, although she's about this tall. But so I always think about how am I going to do this? Well, I put it in Havana's terms, and that's how it works for me visually. This is a woman named Frances Mitnick. This is about access. Access is everything in my world. And with Frances, we were talking. She was in her room on South Beach. She was terrified. She had escaped from, she had a lot of bad things happen to her early in her life, lived through some pomegranates in Eastern Europe, and she had the same birthday as I did. They're 56 years apart, but we shared a birthday and we became fast friends, and it caused me to do a story on South Beach, which ran in a big magazine supplement. This is a guy named Leroy Hatch and his daughter. She's 48, she's 4. I took it Lecompton, Kansas. Call it Lecompton Luminary because he just was full of stories. I mean, couldn't imagine how many stories he could tell. Well, about 3 years ago, I was in my office in Florida, and I got a phone call from a woman and said, "Are you a photographer?" And I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Do you remember a guy named Leroy Hatch?" I said, "Of course I do." I said, "I took his picture when I was in college." And she said, "He's in a nursing assisted care facility here in Topeka, and he has a picture in his wallet that he's had in there for more than 35 years." He said it was the most important thing that happened to him in his life was when a young man stopped, took his picture, and put it on the front page of a newspaper. So that taught me about the responsibility I have to my subjects. Had it in his wallet for 35 years. I was on an assignment in Orlando, and I met a man who told me we were having lunch, and he mentioned his story, and this is his story.
We met at a wedding. I was best man for my best friend, and I saw her picture on the piano that night after the rehearsal. The next day, we had the big wedding, and she was in the lineup in the back of the church. And when she came along kissing everybody, I said, "Next." and that was the beginning of a long romance. She just turned 92 in September the 4th, and we'll be married 66 years in February.
He was kind. He has the patience of Job. Till this day, he still does.
And before I knew it, I was enrolled in Lycoming College in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And we served in the Methodist Church as a fully ordained minister for some 35 years.
I didn't think that I was going to enjoy going into the ministry, but I found out that I did. I liked it as well as he did.
We were best friends, and we worked together. She would counsel the people, especially the ladies that were having trouble. And we have the wonderful memories, wonderful memories. And the beauty part is that we still have them. We still have them. And that's unheard of.
I'm going to show one more video. I feel guilty for getting more time than everybody else, but Larry said to, so. Okay. This last one is a project that I'm doing with Laura. Laura, raise your hand. Laura works with me at Straw Hat Visuals. That's one of the nice things now. You don't have to have a printing press. You don't have to have a television company. You just have to have access to a website and some energy, and you can do things. And one of our goals is we're doing a series of educational films, and it's sort of a different thing. We're just trying to explain very simple concepts to people. And our goal is to, over the next couple years, help 1 million kids learn how to read English as a second language. And so this is one of the pieces that we did. It's on cranes. It's a crane migration. A lot of our work involves environmental things now. So I'll run this one.
This part of Nebraska with the Platte River is, I think, maybe the most spectacular, biologically at least, of all of the parts of Nebraska. We don't have mountains, but we've got sand hills. We don't have oceans, but we've got an incredible river going from one end to the other. And one of the most incredible things about it is that in the spring, from mid-February to early April, we get the largest assemblage of cranes anywhere in the world, 500,000 roughly, that stop here for collectively about 6 weeks, individually about 2-3 weeks probably, roosting every night in the Platte River, which is wide and shallow and sandy and relatively free of disturbance. So it becomes a real confluence, I guess, of both the river and the cranes. The cranes are a group of birds that are probably 10 times more ancient than anything that looked like humans. 50 million years is about when the crane started, so it's one of the more archaic birds of the world. But in all that time, it's become incredibly adapted. The birds are long-lived. Some of them in the captivity live up to 70-some years, and they have long-term pair bonds. They remain paired almost indefinitely. They have very strong family bonds. They raise one, occasionally 2 young, and those young stay with them not only the first year, but on into the second year and until they start breeding the third year. So they have the kind of family units that we'd like to think humans might have. Strong attachments, powerful attachments to the land. They migrate 4,000 miles by memory, learning the places that their parents in effect showed them where it was safe to land, avoiding those where it's not. So there's a real tradition, I think, a behavioral tradition that can be traced back over the generations. There aren't any other birds that, to my mind, are anything quite that interesting.
Thanks, Larry.